Hi everyone, my name is Vasily Lenik and you are watching the Minimal API course series where we are building a REST API for a habit tracker mobile application following industry's best practices. This video will be a wrap-up to the adding functionality parts of our core series. Basically, we will cover the last API endpoints that we need to add for our habits model. But as well, we will be setting up some infrastructure code for the unit testing part that comes right after. So, some changes that have been implementing since the previous video is, first of all, I've added the iDateTime provider that I'm going to reuse throughout the solution itself. Since we will need to work with dates throughout our API, we will need a way to mock the current time in our unit tests. As well, the iHabit service has received a couple of quality of life improvements. First of all, I've removed the old method where we were setting up the completed date, and I've added two separate API endpoints and two separate methods, since this will be easier to unit test and easier to understand in the long run. Other than that, we have a method for getting our calendar widget information, so get monthly completion status, as well two small methods for getting the longest streak ever and getting the current ongoing streak for our habit. The other most important change for the current video is the day information, so we no longer have the boolean checked field over here, since it will be problematic and we will have a lot of data if we save the status, the completion status for habit for each day. I decided to go and save only the completion status for days where the habit itself has been completed. The most important part over here is the migration, and namely the naming convention that I'm using for my migrations. I've searched for a while for an industry approved way of naming the migrations, but everyone is naming it their own way. To me, the most logical way to name my migration is, first of all, indicating the table that the migration changes, then the action itself, in our case removing the column, then the columns themselves. So basically we have a day information, remove column, and which column we are removing. Those were the small changes that I wanted to cover. As well, let's go over to our service, the habit service itself. Let's see how I've implemented the set methods. So we have, by the way, we have a small change over here as well. So get habit async. I've been reusing this part throughout the service itself, so I've decided to move it to a get habit async private method. So the next part is adding a completion date, basically marking a habit as completed for a specific day. I first get the habit itself, then check if there is already a completion entry for the set habit. This part is really controversial, but I prefer having it for this set implementation. And the same goes for removing a completed day, basically first checking if the habit exists, if the completion entry is there, and then removing it all together and saving the changes. And for getting the completion status for the whole month itself, I'm just running a simple query on top of the days information where I retrieve all the completion entries between the first day of the month and the last day of the month for a specific habit, then converting them to a day information list. For getting the current and the longest streak, it's too simple for each loops over here. You can see that getting the longest ever streak and getting the current streak async. I'm not going to dive into the code base, you can check it out yourself. By the way, everything is in the GitHub repository, so you can go directly there and check it out. For the endpoints themselves, I have added one endpoint for each of our new methods. So we have get monthly completion status on the path of calendar, basically with a habit ID returns a 404 if no habit is found, else a list of the informations. Next we have the current streak for a specific habit, 200 and 404 longest streak, the same thing, 404 and 200. Removing the completion status itself is a map delete on top of this specific path itself, which returns a 404 or at 204 no content, and adding the completion status itself, it's somewhat similar with the 201 and 404. Small thing worth mentioning here, basically where we return 201 for adding completion status, I'm returning as well the link to the getting monthly completion statuses themselves. So if I debug it right now and I go to Postman and we go over here, change this to a post, and let's say the 29th of May. If I run this right now, basically we go to the headers part, and over here you can see the location where we could go and retrieve the calendar information for a specific habit. So over here we have the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 15th, and down here we have the 29th, and as well we can just delete it right away. 204. If we run this query again, no more completion status for a specific date. For getting the current streak, I'm using the before mentioned time provider over here, and as well I think for the getting monthly completion status I'm using the same datetime provider, since the app itself shows only the current month, so we can mock it out and reuse it in our integration tests. This was really a small video since we are just basically wrapping everything up. Starting next video, we are going to start covering topics like NuGet libraries that you might want to use in your production API. Those of course will be overkill for this minimal API, for this habit tracker minimal API, but in your production scenarios you might want to use those. I'm speaking of things like poly, one-off, result patterns, etc. Otherwise, the next biggest topic will be, of course, unit and integration testing, because in my opinion, those are some of the most important things that we need to cover up. If you've liked this course so far, give a like, subscribe to the button, click the notification bell, share with your friends, etc. Until then, I'll drop somewhere here some links to some other videos that you can go and check it out, and see ya in the next video.